benefits of one vaccine versus another. Dr. Fauci, what would be your message to people who are trying to compare the efficacy of these different vaccines as they are making decisions about how to move forward? What will you tell them?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, because that really is an important issue. We have 3 highly efficacious vaccines with a good safety profile. I think it is not appropriate, understandable, but not really appropriate to be shopping around to see which one you could get because you're making a guess of which one is better. The only way you know if one is better than the other is to do a head-to-head comparison in a clinical trial. So my advice when people ask me is that what is the most important thing is to get vaccinated as quickly as possible when your turn comes up to get vaccine. Which particular candidate you get is really not nearly as relevant as getting it as soon as you can. So if you go into a clinic and they have any of the one of the 3 available, I would just take it rather than waiting maybe a few weeks to a month for something that you think might be better. All 3 are highly efficacious.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Marshall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Leadership is what America is now looking for. They're looking for a strong, consistent, honest voice from the NIH, from the CDC, the FDA, and from the White House. And frankly, Dr. Fauci, a nation is turning its lonely eyes to you for leadership. Let's talk about schools for a second. I think you all know and agree with me, our schools our youth are in a mental health crisis. Our youth are suffering from increased instances of suicide, substance abuse, overdoses, depression, a true epidemic. And this was very predictable for all of us from the healthcare field, that when we close down schools without the social interaction, we'd see increased mental health crisis, totally predictable. Let's talk about the science of viruses for just a second. As a private practice OBGYN for 25 years, I would tell you that viruses are predictably unpredictable, that how they impact a non-pregnant versus a pregnant woman certainly is different. And what I feel like when I try to listen very hard to you all is that that little science we do have is being presented as dogma, as gospel, and we know it's not. It's anecdotal at best. All I've heard so far today is basically anecdotal experiences. When it comes to schools, we need to hear a stronger voice from you all, from leadership. We need to hear a stronger voice, not a wishy-washy voice. And Dr. Fauci, I would ask you, do you agree with me that the benefits outweigh the risk of getting children back in school? Will you tell America we need to get our kids back to school?
I have said that repetitively. As you know, you've obviously been following what I've been saying. I've been saying the most important thing we need to do is to try as best as possible to get our children back to school safely. And that's exactly what I've been saying over and over again, right in this room in previous hearings. I think the chair has heard me say that multiple
Based upon everything we know about the virus, the epidemic we have now, do you feel the benefits outweigh the risk of getting children into schools across America?
Well, I mean, if you listen to the CDC's recommendations, that's exactly what they're saying. They're talking about the benefits versus the risk. And as you know, their guidelines are trying to get people to follow guidelines that will get the children back to school with the minimum risk.
I was hoping a yes or no answer, but I'll move on to mask. 1 mask, 2 masks, oh me, oh my. You know, President Biden recently said that we should all wear masks until everyone is vaccinated. That's probably the worst thing that could have been said for compliance. So many people have said, why would I go get a vaccine when the president says we have to keep wearing masks until everyone's vaccinated? We Americans feel like the goal line keeps moving. And I understand your fear of different variants and all those different things going on here, but where is the science that clearly shows wearing masks is helpful after you've had the vaccines? And for the sake of time, I need to move on, but all I've heard the question asked already, and I've heard anecdotal evidence, but I would love to have you all send me the studies that show that it is absolutely beneficial to wear masks after you've been vaccinated or if you've had the virus. And we all want to know, where is the goal line? When can we stop moving masks? I want to talk about the border, though. That's what I'm really concerned about. I just visited the border. My third trip there. It's certainly a humanitarian crisis, and I'm sure anyone that's been down there would agree with me that it's a national security crisis, but I want to talk about the healthcare crisis going on there. When I went down with a group of physicians 3 years ago or so, I was concerned about just the doctors and nurses being overwhelmed. I was concerned about tuberculosis, hepatitis, scabies, sexually transmitted diseases, and other communicable diseases. But now, based upon what we know, the incidence of COVID is 5 to 25% of the people coming across the border. And then what I see is they take a group of folks, 50 to 60 people, they put them on one bus, and they do a couple of exams, and they all put them in some type of a dorm setting. So if they all didn't have the virus, they soon will, and then we let them go out into the public. That just seems hypocritical. You know, the application that you're talking about for when we can let ships come to Alaska, and the concern about variants from South Africa, that just seems hypocritical to me. While I respect completely where you're coming from, it seems like it's a double standard. Dr. Fauci, are you comfortable with what we're doing on the border from an ID standpoint?
The reason I would have to hedge on that, because I'm not really very deeply familiar with the details of what's going on at the border. And that's perfectly honest with you, Dr. Marshall. I really am not familiar enough with the situation at the border to be able to make a comment. If I was, I would.
Whose job is it to know that?
I can chime in and say that I am aware that at CBP sites that there's overcrowding and that we need to, from an infectious disease standpoint, from a COVID standpoint, we need to de-densify what is happening at CBP. We've been working closely with ORR as our children leave CBP and move to the ORR sites to work towards getting them screened and tested, which is why they have, you know what % positivity they have there. Those ORR sites are much improved compared to the CBP sites with regard to how those children are cared for, who is caring for them, and we are providing technical guidance on those ORR sites to work to make sure that they are as safe as possible using mitigation strategies at their.
But do you see the hypocrisy in what we're doing to America? We're saying that I can't have a barbecue with my entire family on the July 4th. I can't have Easter service worship together, but we're going to let people come across the border in mass numbers and just release them into. Does that not seem hypocritical?
I think there are two different situations that we have to handle. We have to handle in two different ways, and we have guidance and strategies for how we're providing technical guidance for the challenges that are occurring in the density at the border, and then we're trying to keep the public safe using the evidence-based strategies there. Thank you.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Senator Rosen.
Thank you, Chair Murray, Ranking Member Burritt. I'd really like to thank all of the doctors for being here, for their tireless service to our nation, for their information, for their hard work in studying. And I'd like to just make this other comment, that most of us here do understand that data takes time. Good data takes time. Coronavirus is a new virus. It hasn't been around that long. We haven't collected all the data to show us what the trends or variants may be. It's of course evolving, and that good data that will help us do the predictions that epidemiologists and doctors like yourselves help to do will be there. It's just a matter of time. I appreciate how quickly you're working on that. But
without any utilities, any water, anything else. And the former resident commissioner gave us a very hospitable time to get it. Anyhow, you put a lot of thought and effort into this legislation, and I am proud to be sponsoring it in the Senate. And to Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, in just a short time in Congress, you have become a fierce advocate on behalf of the Puerto Rican community. So we welcome the opportunity to work with you as well on such a critical issue. For decades, we have witnessed the shortfalls and inequities born out of the U.S. current territorial arrangement. The more than 3 million residents of Puerto Rico who are U.S. citizens have been repeatedly denied the ability to govern themselves and too often are treated like second-class citizens by the federal government. The premise of the Puerto Rican Self-Determination Act is really quite simple. The future of Puerto Rico should be in the hands of the people of Puerto Rico. The problem is that there has never been a viable, inclusive, and formal democratic process for the people of Puerto Rico to chart their own future. Puerto Rico's status has been debated on the island for decades now. 5 non-binding referendums have been held since 1967, including the most recent one in November, to no avail. And that's where our legislation comes in. Our bill will set up a status convention composed of delegates elected by the people of Puerto Rico. These delegates would then enter into formal talks to consider options relating to Puerto Rico's status with a bilateral negotiating commission composed of several members of Congress and other federal officials. First time really that we have a connection with Congress in terms of finally coming to a resolution of Puerto Rico's status. And under our bill, these options will be put before the people of Puerto Rico to vote in a federally recognized referendum for the first time. The more than 3 million Puerto Ricans living on the island deserve a legitimate and democratic process to decide their future. And the Puerto Rico Self-Determination Act is the most comprehensive approach to addressing the island's future status. I'm thrilled to be sponsoring it. I'd like to announce that Senator Roger Wicker, a Republican colleague, has now joined me as a prime co-sponsor, and we have several other members of the Senate who are co-sponsoring it with us as well. And then very briefly, so that I can legitimize myself for my friends in Spanish, y para nuestros amigos de la prensa hispana, algunas palabras en español. Me siento muy orgulloso de estar aquí para presentar este proyecto de ley con mis colegas boricuas, las congresistas Velázquez y Ocasio-Cortez. Este proyecto de ley establece un proceso democrático, legítimo y inclusivo que verdaderamente le ofrece al pueblo puertorriqueño varias opciones sobre su estatus político. Ya es hora que le debemos a los puertorriqueños una oportunidad verdadera para decidir por sí mismo el futuro de la isla. El futuro de Puerto Rico debe estar en las manos del puertorriqueño. Y eso es lo que estamos logrando con esta legislación. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Now, you mentioned that the bill doesn't advocate for any specific status for Puerto Rico. I get that. Then you also say that that the status of the current territorial state, or the territorial status, will not be included. Isn't that by omission essentially saying that you're not advocating for any
The
status?
Commonwealth, as we know it, is basically a colonial status. The United States Congress has authority over the affairs of Puerto Rico. So in that respect, what we are saying is that it has to be a formula outside the territorial clause. And that is for the status convention to discuss among the delegates in the formulation and definition of the different formulas.
Will they be instructed to not discuss territorial status whatsoever?
Territorial clause. Territorial. That's the definition of what we have today as a colony.
So they will be told, though, to not discuss territorial status whatsoever?
No, we are not telling them what to discuss. We are saying in the bill that it should be any option that is outside the territorial clause.
What does that mean exactly?
That means what we have today.
So people cannot vote on in Puerto Rico to remain a territory in the bill.
I'm sorry, that what?
So basically, people in Puerto Rico will not be able to ultimately vote on being a territory in the end.
Well, then why are we going through all this process if we are going to, if the people, look, we have seen it, the financial crisis in Puerto Rico, the earthquake and the inability of Puerto Rico to deal with that because you had an administration here, Donald Trump, that decided that, look, I am the president, I can do whatever I want with Puerto Rico, even to sell it. So what we are saying is, it has to be a formula that empowers the government, that will be constituted by the action of whatever options the Puerto Rican people decide.
Next question.
Senator, can you tell us what the other sponsors additional to
Yes.
the conference?
Yes. Let me just be precise. Our other co-sponsors at this point in time, or just at the beginning, Senator Wicker, as I said, Senator Sanders, Senator Brown, Booker, Gillibrand, Warren, and Martin. Martin.
Can I ask, obviously Puerto Rico does have a delegate that they have sent to Congress. Have you spoken to her?
Oh, yes.
The resident commissioner, Jennifer Gonzalez?
Yeah.
And do you think it's important to have her support on this legislation? Because obviously she is the elected representative from Puerto Rico here in Congress.
So I reached out to Jennifer Gonzalez, and I told her that it was important for us to discuss how can we move forward on ending the colonial status of Puerto Rico. Look, she is the Republican delegate that was elected, and she supports statehood. The issue here is that the last plebiscite that was conducted in Puerto Rico and was created by the Puerto Rican legislature didn't reach a consensus within the legislature. It will not be federally binding. So they voted for that, and what is going to happen next? It has to be a process where the U.S. Congress, in this legislation, creates a bilateral commission between Puerto Rico and the U.S. Congress to work on everything that needs to happen. And so that whatever decision is made, whatever outcome of a referendum, they will come here and we will say, now what, the U.S. Congress, we must act. Yes.
Answer just very briefly. I think the resident commissioner's views are very important. But just like any other member of Congress, as a United States Senator from New Jersey, that doesn't mean I speak for the whole nation. It means that I have a view from a New Jersey perspective, and of course I have a view as it relates to the United States. So what we are doing here is actually being inclusive, and giving a real process to the people of Puerto Rico to decide their own destiny, including that I think it would be possible that, as speaking as the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, I have seen other places in the world that have some type of a free association that isn't colonial though, and isn't a commonwealth, and that gives the government greater self-governance over itself, but may have an association that has benefits in trade and other things. So these are all the potential options. But I think that what we offer, and I'm certainly sure that the Congresswomen would welcome further along, is the opportunity for all of Puerto Rico society to decide their future.
And someone asked me if there has been any discussion with the leadership. And Alexandria Ocasio and I can tell you that, look, we will create that space and that opportunity when we see that people are willing to sit down and work on a solution that will put an end to this situation 123 years after Puerto Rico was invaded with the promise of democracy. And what we have is a colonial rule. So look, first, we must respect. We just passed H.R. 1 that have the voting rights, right? We must respect the right of the minority in Puerto Rico to be able to participate in a broad democratic, transparent, inclusive effort. This is not an election to elect a governor. This is an election that must involve everyone who has been impacted over 123 years. So we got to respect the right of everyone to have their voices heard in a process that is democratic, that is transparent. That when my sister in Puerto Rico, my twin sister, who is pro-statehood, when she goes out to cast her vote, she should know what does that mean, what impact that will have on her life. Or if she decided to vote for free association, they need to know. Education is very important. Outreach, the ability for everyone to have financial resources to be able to run for delegate. All that is contemplated in this bill.
Okay, last question. One more question.
If Puerto Rico were to go through association or even independent, what type of backup could Puerto Rico have, considering how close it is to Cuba in regards to protection, given that Cuba has had its eye on Puerto Rico for so many decades?
Well, look, the people of Puerto Rico will decide their future. And whatever that future is, they will be able to determine their security, they will be able to determine their economy, they will be able to determine who they have relationships with. And so I trust the people of Puerto Rico to make the right decisions for themselves and their future.
All right, thank you all.
Can I get back to one off topic
Alexander,
question?
if you want to ask.
Sure. No, I think in kind of contemplating this question as well about status and should the status quo be an option. I think one thing that's important is that this is about the identity of the United States as well. If we want to consider ourselves a democracy and live up to our values, it is fundamentally incompatible for an open democracy to have subjects. So this is about us as a nation also operating with integrity so that all people can have their status and their standing, their participation in our society as a result of the process of free self-determination. That's what we enjoy here in the continental United States, and frankly, it is what all people should be able to enjoy. And so that is why the status quo is incompatible, because a colony is incompatible with democracy. It's incompatible with full citizenship. And we should all be able to enjoy the right to vote for our leaders. We should all be able to enjoy the right to equal treatment. And self-determination is how we can accomplish that. In a process that is respected by all, that has integrity, and is not doubted by any party.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Hello and welcome to the Nomiki Show. I am Nomiki Konst. So let's give a standing ovation for our favorite old socialist.
As you may know, I asked Mr. Bezos to testify at this hearing. He declined my invitation, and that's too bad. Because if he was with us this morning, I would ask him the following question. And that is, Mr. Bezos, you are worth $182 billion. That's a B. 182 billion. You're the wealthiest person in the world. Why are you doing everything in your power to stop your workers in Bessemer, Alabama, from joining a union so that they can negotiate for better wages, better benefits, and better working conditions?
Nailed it. Bernie, you still got the game. This is the fight of our lifetimes. This is bigger than organizing one warehouse in Alabama. This is bigger than affirming the right to organize in one of those so-called right-to-work states where they still denounce legitimate union campaigns as the work of outside agitators. Bless their racist, anti-Semitic, xenophobic little hearts. And that's why the PRO Act is so important. Now, this is bigger. This is much, much bigger than all of that. This is the overdue showdown between the libertarian bro culture of Silicon Valley and, well, the rest of us. This is the moment we draw the line and say to Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and even to Jeff Bezos, being rich doesn't make you right. Consumers spending their money with you is not an affirmation of your moral value. Sales are not votes. Winning in the marketplace is not the same as winning an election, whether for government office or for union status. But all these ideas are products of one of the most toxic strands of American capitalist philosophy. Check that. I won't even honor it by calling it a philosophy. The toxic strand of self-justification that the billionaires in Silicon Valley have used to justify their disproportionate wealth and bamboozle others into believing they were somehow new and different. They adored Ayn Rand. They bought her bull about the individualists because they were the individualists. That was not old-fashioned exploitation. That's not what this was. This was the internet, the digital revolution. It was all new. Well, crap. This is Carnegie and Ford hiding behind algorithms. And I'm so proud of the food and commercial workers for taking on this fight to Amazon. And so many others are fighting by their side. Sarah Nelson, the president of the CWA-AFA, the American Flight Attendants Workers, the official labor leader of the Nomiki Show, she was in Bessemer yesterday and sent this back.
This is the Amazon warehouse. And it's got big vote signs everywhere. The parking lot is empty today, but normally there'd be cars and activity everywhere here. They let people have the day off and paid them, you know, because it's the end of the union election, and so the employer wants to make sure that they know they're taking care of their people. Even though in Birmingham you can't even rent an apartment for $15 an hour, this is the mailbox that Amazon set up, even though they weren't supposed to. The NLRB told them they weren't supposed to, and then they put it in this tent, like right in front of the front entrance for the workers. Speak for yourself. Mail your ballot here. Major violation. Major violation. And it's still here. It's still here. But the workers I talked to today are like, you know, they're not having it.
Go, Sarah. You know, workers can win this vote at Amazon, and we can finally bury Ayn Rand and restore working people to their rightful place. And with the PRO Act, which will hopefully pass in the Senate if we pressure our Democrats to vote for it, that is how we will make sure that workers have the right to organize in every single state, even if it's a right to work state in this country. And it will make sure that there are fair elections, labor elections, and that these types of violations won't happen anymore. So go support the PRO Act, urge your senators to support the PRO Act, make phone calls, send out the memes, do what you have to do online, make the phone calls. The PRO Act will transform labor in this country. And we have a great show today. We're going to actually start out with one of our favorite historians on labor, on FDR. He's a Marxist historian, of course, Harvey Kaye. Professor Harvey Kaye is here. And later we have the one, the only Thursday panel. It's Representative Rabb and Arun Chaudhary. We're going to talk about today's news. We'll be right back after this break. Only because he's part of our book club am I going to force Professor Harvey Kaye to listen to my book club pitch, because I forgot to do it. And it was very relevant to our opening. I just finished up a conversation with Mackenzie Work on Capital is Dead, Is This Something Worse?, which talks about how data and information are new form, I shouldn't say new form of capital, it's something different. And it was such a revealing conversation with Mackenzie Work. The book is so easy to read. It's a great starter book. And it's after our opening talking about Amazon and the tech sector, I urge all of you to check out the book and join our book club at patreon.com/the Nomiki Show. Professor Harvey Kaye in the house. It's Thursday. Oh man. Okay. So Professor Harvey Kaye, if you don't know him already, if you don't have his bio memorized, he is Professor Emeritus at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, and he's an AFT union member. He is the author of TNS Book Club entry number 1, Thomas Paine and the Promise of America, also The Fight for Four Freedoms, Take Hold of Our History, Make America Radical Again, and FDR on Democracy, and how many more? 21 total? 22? What was the total count of books?
Now you're over the top.
I don't know. I'm just making up numbers.
Let's go. Yeah. Let's say 18, and another time we'll be precise.
21.
I'm also a proud owner.
I don't even have mine out today. Round 2. Okay. Big day because, there's a lot of conversation right now coming from the Biden administration about how their FDR, sit down, no pun intended. Stand down, FDR. We are better than you. Our legacy in 66 days is already better than your entire legacy of 3 terms. What on earth are they thinking?
Well, the worst thing is it would be bad enough if only the Biden folks celebrated themselves. But it's that writers in places like the New York Times, both columnists and journalists alike, it seems, and in other places, though not universally, but in all too many places, they're talking as if Biden is not simply the resurrection of FDR, or in the domestic sense, the resurrection of LBJ, but we can leave that for a moment, but that somehow he's gone further than FDR had gone. I mean, it's, in one sense, the historian in me says, these people have no sense of history. Do they really know so little? But they actually word their pieces. I mean, this included not simply the like, say, of, I guess it was David Brooks, who we can expect such foolishness from, but the long time, though now former, but the long time labor journalist for the New York Times, Stephen Greenhouse, the other day in talking about presidents and labor, rightly quoted a friend of mine, Joe McCartan at Georgetown University, about FDR being the friendliest of presidents to labor, but then went on to say, and I want to get the words right, went on to say, still at times, FDR's administration deeply disappointed labor, but gives no example whatsoever. And then on the very next page says, I got to quote it, Roosevelt often pursued the interests of big business. Despite the fact he greatly expanded workers' rights, blah, blah, blah. The point is that even when they want to say something reasonable, they somehow have to do it. They have to smack FDR, and it's over and over again. It really is the case. And I actually have a whole pile of stuff.
Wait, but isn't that a strategy? Aren't they like, okay, well, if we're all going to use FDR as our reference point, then aren't they are trying to make him seem obviously more, I guess, neoliberal or however you want to justify it for that era, more pro-business so that when Biden is pro-business, he's like, oh, FDR was too.
Yeah, well, and I won't leave this question of labor, but I've got to point out today in the New York Times, a longtime writer and book writer and even columnist for the New York Times, Thomas Edsall, who I recall back in I think it was in the 90s, maybe even deeper, was a really progressive writer, really challenging the sort of corporate Washington, D.C. status quo. And he does write some good pieces. But today, and I got in a few arguments with people today as an example of just how eager everyone is to jump on the Biden Democratic Party bandwagon, to the point where they're even willing to literally use words that don't apply. He wrote in a piece called "Biden Wants No Part of the Culture War the GOP Loves." And first he says, according to a rundown by the Center for American Progress of the COVID bill's exceptionally generous provisions. I mean, they're setting it up. You can imagine McConnell. Let's suppose I'm a Republican. I've just read the seemingly progressive Thomas Edsall. And I say, and I remember this. So next week when I come after Biden, I say, don't you think the COVID relief bill was generous enough? I mean, it's as if they're so eager to celebrate the Biden bill, which, by the way, is wonderful in many respects, that they go overboard in a fashion that will turn the COVID bill, and I'll come back to it in just a second, into almost like this great charity measure on the part of the Biden administration for working people. Okay. Because now we come to the next thing. And this is the thing that bugs me no end. It bugged me about the Obamacare question. It bugged me when Obama was running for president. And we all know what his presidency entailed. But crucially, the benefits are universal. Well, the benefits are not universal in the COVID relief bill. They are specifically means tested. Right. Okay. Now, people might say, well, it's almost universal. It's like 85%. The point is, it is either universal or it's not universal. Okay. Now, to come back to the labor stuff, it's the case that this is really important. I asked the other day on Twitter, I know I sent this to you. So let's see now, you think Biden will do to Amazon? Okay. Will do to Amazon. Let's suppose the workers vote for the union. Okay. Let's assume that. It doesn't mean that Amazon will necessarily negotiate in good faith.
Right, exactly.
I mean, that's important.
The next step. Yeah.
I mean, they have all these companies, well, not Amazon, they never recognize the union, but they may say, yeah, we recognize the union. And then they spend a year or more to the point where workers themselves become, like
exhausted.
This union got us nothing. Okay.
Right,
I mean,
right.
Where are we? So back in 1944, during the war, Montgomery Ward was headed, there was a chain store, big company, and also a manufacturer of many an item, headed by a man named Sewell Avery. And I will note that in 1934, 10 years earlier, Sewell Avery joined with the other half a dozen wealthiest men in America to launch something called, and I think this came up also when you had Tom Frank on, the American Liberty League, which I wrote about in my Four Freedoms book. The American Liberty League went out of its way to try to bring down the Roosevelt administration, either at the elections of 34 or as they projected at the election of 30. They failed, and they spent millions trying to do it. But these people hated FDR. And as he later said, I welcome their hatred. Well, now it's 10 years later. It's 1944. Sewell Avery, over and over again, refused to recognize his workers' desire for a union. And according to the wartime regulations, that was utterly unacceptable. Okay, on top of the fact the National Labor Relations Board had already said you must do it. So FDR, maybe in part revenge, but for whatever reason, he literally ordered American troops into the Montgomery Ward headquarters.
Whoa.
And they arrested.
Oh my goodness.
Avery. And there's a famous photo on the cover of the newspapers of the day of two GIs carrying Avery out, still sitting in the chair because he refused to stand up. Now, the story, if you leave it there, seems like a major victory for FDR because, my God, he showed.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Now, what happened was apparently when he was taken to prison, he went to jail. The fact was that apparently he had some deal with the jailers. The jailers were letting him call in his orders to the company, in spite of the fact he was no longer supposed to be the head of the company, that the U.S. had taken it over. So this was becoming something of an embarrassment to FDR, because everyone should realize newspaper publishers did not like FDR. Okay. They did not like him. So they were running these pieces about what an embarrassment for FDR because Sewell Avery is still heading up the company. So FDR said, okay, wait a second. I'm gonna order that the workers vote now. You want the union or do you not? And they voted yes. Okay, which automatically shut up all of these publishers. Okay. Now the question is, let's suppose they vote for the union and Amazon screws around, right? Well, Biden's already said, it's not legal to, it's not legal to do certain kinds of things. And I'm trying to imagine Biden, in order to live up to, this is not going to happen, trying to live up to FDR by, nationalizing what they call federalizing the National Guard in Alabama and sending them into the Amazon warehouse. Yeah. Or maybe, I don't know if he's still officially the executive in charge in any fashion business.
Oh, I wonder if that's why he stepped down. He was like, he might arrest me.
Right? Wouldn't that be a great?
Sure, that's it.
Or how about this? And the troops carry him into the Senate Budget Committee hearing so Bernie can interrogate him properly.
Oh, we can fantasize, Harvey, but the reality is you got to let the process play out. Like, it's his favorite phrase: process, process, process. My God.
Yeah, right. That was a great clip you played of Bernie. I just love the guy. God, I love that guy.
It's like when someone doesn't show up to a debate, you have two candidates and one of the candidates doesn't show up and you still ask them the questions.
Right. Yeah.
So why is it clearly this is a messaging strategy. Someone has issued these talking points or done phone calls with reporters to say, we've actually been more progressive. We've done more than FDR did in his entire 3 terms. It's so preposterous. It's so ridiculous on the surface. And I don't understand how this is continuing to be like, it's
over and over again. Yes. It's over and over again.
My only thought is it's step one in setting up a situation in which they can say, well, no, even your, like we said, even your hero FDR aligned with business on these occasions. But okay, so there's the labor standard, the PRO Act, for instance. It's a fantastic piece of legislation.
Absolutely. Needs
to happen. Biden is supporting it. That is something that they can hold true and say, yes, if this is passed, if Biden, puts on his Johnson hat, his LBJ hat, and pushes Manchin and Sinema and any other bad actors in the Democratic Party, the Senate, to step up, then they can claim the victory. But what are they claiming is the victory right now? What are they claiming that they've achieved?
Right. Well, that's an interesting point because of this. If we look, I'm going to play the historian now for a moment. If we look at the FDR years, the FDR presidency from 1933 until his passing in 1945, elected to the presidency 4 times. Okay, 4 times. That if his initial actions, the first 100 days, became renowned. And they became renowned because immediately FDR stepped in to literally close the banks to make sure they could reopen. And by the way, people had such confidence in FDR that when the banks reopened some days later, more money went back into the banks than had. So, but okay, the other thing is that he signed into law the National Industrial Recovery Act, the Agricultural Adjustment Act, this major series of acts. They created the Civilian Conservation Corps. They signed into law the creation of the PWA, the Public Works Administration, which would take about 2 years to get going, really, because it was huge projects and they did not want to be involved in any kind of corrupt practices. Well, the key thing is this. Everyone remembers not everyone, but people who bother to pay attention usually remember the National Labor Relations Act. And the reason they do is even now, Biden's first move on that first day after his inaugural address was delivered was to throw out Peter Robbs, I'm forgetting the name,
yeah.
something like that, who was this lawyer who was definitely lined up with Trump, as he was with Reagan years ago, very anti-labor. And the idea, they threw him out as a sign that they were going to commit to the labor movement. Well, what FDR did when he signed into law the National Industrial Recovery Act, not simply, he didn't just literally talk about it, he signs into law something that included the right of workers to organize. That's in 1933. Everyone forgets this. It's as if later he gets around to it. No, right away in the first 100 days. And that included, moreover, the first attempt on the part of a federal law to create a minimum wage, okay, which was really crucial. And when he signed it, FDR, giving some signal as to where he was going, said no company should be allowed to operate in the United States that does not pay a living wage. Now, what happened was the corporations found their way around the law on this occasion. But I do want you to know that 2 million plus workers not stormed, but, sort of marched.
You can't say that anymore.
Yeah, right. They marched into the labor movement. Almost overnight, the labor movement grew with 2 million. And then in 1934, there were general strikes around the United States, empowered by workers' desire to be organized and to be recognized. Okay. Then in 1935, FDR is encouraged enough by labor's push and also by his friend, Senator Robert Wagner of New York State, to sign into law the National Labor Relations Act. And that wasn't simply workers have the right to organize. They created the board to make sure the government would stand behind workers' efforts to do so. Now, the Biden statement back, 2 weeks ago or so, his little video for Twitter or something like that, where he said basically workers have the right to organize, you can't mess with them and so on, was a really important step. And I think that the question is to what extent he follows up. And of course, the biggest question is, are they going to do what needs to be done to pass not only the resecuring of voting rights, but the PRO Act, right? The Protection of the Right to Organize Act. And they wouldn't need to say that Biden's gone beyond FDR. What is this? This is like mine is bigger than yours kind of thing. That's crazy. All they need to say is Biden has stood in the tradition of FDR. That's all they got to do. Why belittle the greatest president of the 20th century to score points, right?
Well, I mean, it sounds very classic cap strategy, strangely enough, is pitting one against another. It's a very strange messaging technique. So other than the PRO Act, which if it is signed and other than that, I mean, is there anything else you can stand on, truthfully, that could be compared to the legacy of FDR? Maybe even the first 100 days. Forget it. Maybe that's what they're trying to do, is say in the first 100 days, we've done more. The $1.29 trillion package, which is means tested, as we said, it's not universal. He had to do that. Any president who would have to do that. I would even argue a Republican would have to do that, given the conditions, the material conditions in our country right now and what's about to happen. We haven't even gotten to rent, to dealing with back rents and student loan debt, of course. I mean, there's so many issues that are compounded right now that we haven't even brought to the table. And
I will, a couple of things, as you say, that cross my mind. The first one is, this is an act that whose benefits are temporary. They're only through this year, as I understand, right? That's exactly. First of all, okay. And a relief bill is usually just that. It doesn't make it permanent, though the tax credits in the bill for parents would be significant if they could make that a permanent thing. But I sent my observations and this Tom Edsel's piece around, saying to people, what do you think? And a young friend of mine, 24, actually, I don't mind saying, he won't mind. I say, Cale Brooks over at Jacobin, the producer over there, said to me, what happened to the student debt, question? Okay. My first thought was, well, I mean, they can celebrate this all they want, but they didn't even mobilize enough to push the $15 minimum wage through. I mean, I want to make it clear. This is a great bill. This is a good act to have instituted, but we have yet to know what they're going to do next. Okay. I mean, we haven't had, we haven't had a news conference yet, correct? I do
No,
believe.
it's I think it starts today, tomorrow.
Oh,
I don't know when it is.
Because the big question that I have in mind.
Great question. I had to debate it, but I don't remember when it was.
Okay. Well, the big
It's that later
question
in the
for me,
show.
and because I think this is going to be the moment where we're going to see how much in the direction of FDR they really want to go, is they have promised every week that as soon as the COVID bill was passed, and now they're on their, I guess they're still on tour, right? Their victory tour. They owe the American people an address to Congress. That is Biden-Harris. Owe that. Right. Because right now we don't know where we're going. So far we have this bill. We know it's going to be effective for a certain number of months. That we never got the 2,000. We definitely don't have 2,000 a month. Students with huge debts, former students with huge debts are waiting to hear what's going to happen to them. I mean, over and over, all of these things are coming up. The immigration question is going to definitely come back big time onto the agenda. But for me, seriously, I mean, all of this stuff will lead me to ask, you're celebrating this man as FDR. What are you going to do? What are you going to tell the American people when you go before Congress? Okay, what are you going to tell us? And to what extent, and this is important, and this is really imperative because FDR, and as Bernie knew, is if you're going to make things happen, you don't simply do it from the top down. FDR was very clear about something. When he signed all this stuff into law, he would say, new laws in themselves do not bring the millennium. Then, okay, you're going to have to organize. And he actually sent his cabinet officers out from the Secretary of Agriculture out, over to labor and tell people, you have got to organize if we're going to make these things happen, because capitalists were not eager to accept these laws. Mm-hmm. Okay. They even had their own lawyers say the laws are not in effect until the Supreme Court says they're in effect. So, but FDR knew
that's basically a threat to just
absolutely
pending litigation over and over and over and over
right.
again.
So, so I'd like to hear. Yeah, I'd like to hear. Yeah, right. So I'm sorry, I'm talking over you. I apologize.
No, you're good.
No, so because I'd like to hear. I will tell you what I'd like to hear in Biden's speech. All the things I've just referred to. I want him to lay out the agenda and the priorities, and when he mentions the PRO Act. And he then mentions, and we're going to do everything in our power to, he's already said he's willing to see the reform of the filibuster, which goes against the grain of everything he said before. But the question is, are they going to push it? Are they going to make it happen? Because voting rights, workers' rights, and everything else that matters of a progressive sort to help put him in the FDR tradition hangs on that. And then I want to hear him say, and if everyone tells me that I'm exaggerating, whether FDR ever said it or not, labor said he said it. FDR was supposed to have said, if I went to work in a factory, this time could be I went to a factory or a warehouse, I'd join a union. That's what I want him to say. Okay.
Well, he's Scranton Joe. I mean, is it unusual for a president who's just elected with an pandemic economic situation like this? Is it unusual for them not to present their case to America on day one? I mean, he's spoken to the country, but he hasn't laid out his case to America. Right. Is that unusual? It seems
well, yes, essentially it is. We're used to the fact that when a president's reelected, he will give the State of the Union address. We're used to the fact every year it's called the State of the Union address. Mm-hmm. There is no obligation when you first take in office to do that. However, in the face of a crisis such as this, it would be unimaginable that Biden would not go before Congress and the nation in the age of television and the web and all of that. And the world will watch. I mean, that's how significant it will be, because seriously speaking, the world is waiting to hear what this president wants to do in the face of fascists abroad, fascists at home, conservatives in the Congress, and fascists in the Congress
fascists
too.
in the Congress, yeah.
Okay. And by the way, let's not forget that people are mobilized in a fashion. I mean, Black Lives Matter, the labor movement, folks are ready and willing to make noise. And I think there is this holding of breath right now to see what kind of noise we make.
That's right. So let's pivot to LBJ, because I love to compare him to LBJ, or want him to be like. I don't. It's not that I compare him to, but he is a creature of the Senate, and he should have some skills that LBJ had. Like, I don't know, twisting Joe Manchin's arm, which he's done a little bit of, or politely non-touching twisting Kirsten Sinema's arms. He's more likely to massage her shoulders, but whatever. No, I mean, but the reality is that it's peculiar to me that he is waiting for everyone to come to him or the process to be played out. It just seems it's like a stalling tactic. He's actually speaking right now. If you're seeing me pause for a second, do we want to, Dorsey? Can we play that? Can we play him speaking? Yeah, they do their press briefings at 3:00 usually, so I didn't know if it was today or yesterday. Apologies, guys. I'm getting a lot of notes in as I'm doing this interview. Yes. Okay, we're gonna go live in a second. Okay, let's play him, and we can always lower it. And if you want to make comments, feel free to talk over Biden. It's like we're on CNN.
We needed a whole of government approach, so I directed Jeff Zients, the coordinator of our COVID-19 response, to put us on a war footing, and I meant that in a literal sense, to get us on track to truly beat this virus. And I'm proud to announce that tomorrow, 58 days into our administration, we will have met my goal of administering 100 million shots to our fellow Americans. That's weeks ahead of schedule, and even with the setbacks we faced during the winter storms. And there's another big step on the path to putting checks in pockets and shots in people's arms. When we crossed the 50 million doses just 3 weeks ago, I told you that every time we hit the 50 million mark, I'd update you on our progress. So here's where we are today. 8 weeks ago, only 8% of seniors, those most vulnerable to COVID-19, had received a vaccination. Today, 65% of people aged 65 or older have received at least one shot, and 36% are fully vaccinated. And that's key, because this is the population that represents 80% of the well over 500,000 COVID-19 deaths that have occurred in America. We have nearly double the amount of vaccine doses that we distribute to states, tribes, and territories each week. We have gone from 1 million shots a day that I promised in December before we were even sworn in to an average of 2.5 million shots a day, outpacing the rest of the world significantly. And here's how we accomplished this. Using the power given to a president under the Defense Production Act,
there you go.
We expedited critical materials in vaccine production, such as equipment, machinery, and supplies. We work with vaccine manufacturers to speed up the delivery of millions more doses and brokered a historic manufacturing partnership between competing companies who put patriotism and public health first. These steps put us on track to have enough vaccine supply for every adult American by the end of May, months earlier than anyone expected. And we stood up or supplied more than 600 community vaccination sites that are administering hundreds of thousands of shots per day. We launched the federal pharmacy program, which has allowed millions of Americans to get a shot at one of 14,000 local pharmacies in this country, the same way they get their flu shot. And for folks who aren't near a pharmacy or mass vaccination center, we've supplied more than 500 mobile clinics, like pop-up sites or vans, meeting people where they are. We deployed nearly 6,000 federal personnel, including.
So let's mute this for a second.
Military,
because we just got a little bit of an update that he basically just spends the next this is not fully live. He basically spends the next 4 minutes or a few minutes talking about how they distributed the vaccine.
Yeah,
Okay.
I just had an idea though. It occurred
Yeah.
to me when he mentioned the Defense Production Act.
Yeah.
If maybe there's some clause in there which would allow him to send troops into Amazon and
Hashtag arrest Bezos. That's
yeah,
what
right.
we gotta do.
Sorry, I didn't mean to take us away. It's just I had before I forgot. You know.
No, I took us away. All right. So how can he channel LBJ more? What would LBJ do in this moment?
Okay, so LBJ took office November 22nd, 1963, in the wake of John Kennedy's assassination. And he went before Congress. And by the way, an assassination is a pretty critical moment in history. People were just dumbfounded in a certain way. What happens next kind of thing. Right. And it was the middle of the Cold War and people weren't quite sure. And we shouldn't forget that it was only a year after the Cuban Missile Crisis. So there's all of this. But LBJ went before Congress and he laid out an agenda, what they were going to do.
How soon after? This is the next day?
I think it was 5 days later, something like that. Yeah. And by the way, everyone remembers the agenda because it began with the civil rights question.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I may surprise people, but LBJ always said that he knew he was more liberal than Kennedy. And if you knew anything about LBJ, you would believe that. And if you knew anything about Kennedy, you would believe it too. Okay. But the interesting thing that we forget, and this is not to take us away from Biden, but so the second item on the agenda was to fulfill Kennedy's promise of cutting taxes on business, I believe it was. And this was a terrible precedent at that time. Republicans for many years afterward would refer to Kennedy's idea of cutting taxes to validate their own efforts to do so. But the point was that LBJ did offer, in spite of his, I believe that a younger Biden could give a good speech, even though some of it might have been plagiarized. Okay. I don't know if everyone knows my reference there, but the fact is that
the Neil Kinnock speech from his presidential campaign in 80, what year was 88?
Yeah. The 88 election season was that. Yeah. But the thing is, LBJ
gotta get out of that race because of it. Yeah.
LBJ was not known for as a dynamic speaker. His Texas drawl really sort of slowed things down. But actually, he gave remarkable speeches because he could speak somehow to Americans so that they fully understood. He was very clear about where he was going. Let's not forget it. Somebody's bound to just tweet me and say, "What the hell's wrong with you?" LBJ took us into Vietnam far, far more deeply than Kennedy had taken us into Vietnam, and we know the number of deaths. American deaths were 75,000, and the total deaths might have been up to 1 million in Vietnam as a consequence. But the point was that LBJ was a decided progressive on domestic affairs, except for one thing. And this is why I hope Biden does not become LBJ on this one issue. LBJ told George Meany, the head of the AFL-CIO, and Walter Reuther, who was the head of the industrial section and the UAW, that he had an agenda. He laid out the agenda. It had to do with civil rights, fighting poverty, et cetera, Medicare, Medicaid, and somehow or other, labor's desire to reform the labor law, the Taft-Hartley law of 1947. The idea was to liberate labor to be able to go into the South and organize. In other words, to block the so-called right to work laws from stymieing them. Okay. And the problem was that LBJ promised them that they would do that as like number 5 on the list. And what happened was it was winter of 65, 66. We're already going deeply into Vietnam. The point was that LBJ's political capital was running out. And it was, I believe, it was one of, or the only filibuster that LBJ failed to break. And as a consequence, no labor law reform occurred. So if Biden does not secure the PRO Act with labor having his back and the Democrats bowing to that ambition, then one could talk about Biden being LBJ in a way we don't want him to be LBJ.
It's interesting. So if LBJ had worked to organize the South, while
if he
he
had
signed
opened the door to doing it,
if it opened the door to doing it while he signed the Civil Rights Act, he wouldn't have lost the South for generations, potentially.
Yeah, he himself didn't. Yeah, well, the main thing.
Does that make sense?
The better way to look at it would be this. Let's go even bigger. The fact is, there would have been a hell of a lot more struggles going on in the South alongside of civil rights. And since most African Americans were workers, it would have literally been a combined civil rights, labor rights kind of thing. American history would have changed radically.
That is amazing. So speaking of that, Luke King asks a question, says, speaking of LBJ, the Democratic Party hasn't won a majority of white voters in a presidential election since LBJ signed the Voting Rights Act. Care to speculate why? Well, racism? I wonder why. Gerrymandering, racism. I mean, it's not related, but
I hesitate to just say racism because class was so fundamental to those things at the time. But race kept us from having national health care in the late 40s in many ways. Okay. That also has to do with the South, because look, if Truman had followed through, well, he did. Truman wanted national health care. He picked it up from FDR's desire to have Social Security included and the Economic Bill of Rights speech of 44. And I won't keep us long. I know you've got Arun and Rep Rabb coming. So, but the thing is that when Truman lost the Congress in 46, which is a whole labor question in itself we could have gotten into, the Republicans were clearly going to block all of the reforms that FDR wanted to pursue and Truman had promised to pick up on. And capital mobilized against national health care. And so too did the Southern Democrats who came to be known as Dixiecrats. Because the Northern capitalists did not want to empower workers, okay? And they were prepared to offer healthcare benefits to workers in order to avoid national health care.
Interesting.
And then the Southern Democrats, this will be my last point, they did not want national health care, in spite of the fact that white workers might well have wanted national health care, but the powerful in the South did not want it because they did not want to integrate the hospitals.
Oh, yes. This is a big, right.
Yep. Now, there's the racial thing just used to literally destroy. American history would be so different today. That's all I can say.
Wow. Those two things that happened. Yeah. Professor Harvey Kaye, love having you on. Never enough time.
Love joining you.
Hopefully we can do another special soon. Maybe there'll be some breaking news and we can jump on and just go for an hour.
Happily. Happily. Just ask. I'm here. Just have Ruthie give me a call. I'm all ready. Okay, thank you.
You're pulling back the curtain. This is the third rail of the show. You can't do that. Cheers.
Okay, bye-bye.
With your mug. All right. We'll be right back with Arun Chaudhary and Rep Rabb.
Hey.
Welcome back to the Nomiki Show. It's Thursday, which means Arun Chaudhary, political filmmaker. He's what do you call a Berlinite? What do you call someone from Berlin?
A Berliner, like the donut.
Oh my God, duh. Obviously, you're a Berliner. How do you say it in German?
Berliner. So
Berliner. Berliner.
What could he have done better? The answer is just intonation. Just intonation.
Berliner. Of course, Arun Chaudhary is a political filmmaker. He was the first White House videographer under President Obama, and he was the creative director for, that guy Bernie Sanders, Senator Bernie Sanders, when he was on the campaign trail in 2016. You took the most amazing photos. I still have them. They're framed on my wall. I don't know if you know that, but you've sent me those. And just a little side note. And Rep. Rabb represents the 200th district. It's behind him. And hopefully he won't blend into it today. The 200th district of Pennsylvania in Northwest Philly, correct?
Northwest, that's right.
Highest turnout district in Pennsylvania.
That's right.
You're the organizer in chief of that district. Okay, guys. Wow. All right. Well, I want to start off today talking about the Georgia police officer who did the press conference talking about the man who slaughtered 6 women. I'm sorry, he was a sheriff, not a police officer. Let me make that very clear. And he did that press conference, and he's getting a lot of pushback, rightfully so, for how he treated the murderer who admitted to murdering and explaining his rationale for murdering. Like it was just some sort of affliction, this like, oh, he was just addicted to sex, and so this is why he did it, blah, blah, blah. So he's getting a lot of pushback. Well, amazing people on the internet found this. Let's put that up there.
And he was pretty much fed up and kind of at the end of his rope, and yesterday was a really bad day for him, and this is what he did.
In case you guys can't see that, and for those listening on audio, this sheriff had a shirt that said COVID-19, and it said imported virus from China. Yeah. Think he should step down? Not that this is going to fix any situation, but I'll start with you, Rabb.
Yeah, I think that's a safe bet. Yeah. Well, let's have him step down, and let's take it a little further and have conversations about how law enforcement historically and systemically has been connected to systems of oppression and white supremacy. It has been an extension. When folks, exclusively white people, came into my office in Harrisburg 2 years ago for Second Amendment Day, and they surrounded me talking about my votes on gun issues, and they asked, "Is this you? Did you support these anti-gun bills?" And I said, "I did." I told them, "Listen, I'm a Black man whose family comes from the South, and I assure you, I support the Second Amendment, and I don't know many Black Southerners who don't have multiple guns because we have to protect ourselves from white racist people, many of whom work in law enforcement, so we couldn't trust the police." And he had nothing to say.
Wow.
He had nothing to say. He was not prepared. He was expecting me to be some kind of urban liberal who says, "Oh, I'm against the existence of guns and we need to take people's guns." I'm like, no. My family has had guns for generations because it was our responsibility to protect our families and our property when our own government systemically precluded us from all the other legal routes that our white counterparts had under force of law and cultural practice. And so, this idea that that law enforcement is neutral or is equally responsible for protecting all communities is a fallacy, is a myth that never existed. In the 321 years of policing in this Commonwealth, in Pennsylvania, which started literally in the year 1700, it has always been there to uphold the social order that was dictated by white supremacist values and priorities.
And property.
In property, which is related, right? Because property, the laws around property related to white patriarchy right? And in fact, I made this statement recently with our progressive district attorney at a press conference. And I was saying that until recently, it was legal in Pennsylvania to rape your own spouse because it wasn't considered rape if you were married to the person, which of course really means that men could rape women who lived under the same household who happened to be married to them because they were an extension of their property until recently. I think it was only within the past 30 years. So within our lifetimes, that was, and so if you're enforcing those laws that are inherently misogynistic, they're inherently racist, then you are complicit in that. And if you don't speak up from the inside, like I do as an elected official, I can tell you Harrisburg, City Hall, the Capitol Hill are infected by these diseases, right? If I don't say that and I don't then act on it through legislation and other things that I do, then I am complicit.
Yes.
And the same is for law enforcement.
This is what's so frustrating about the situation. After the national dialogue that we have had over the last year surrounding law enforcement and race, with the uprisings over the summer, with storming the Capitol and seeing how people in the Capitol were organizing with those outside and the off-duty cops showing up, and so much that has happened in Georgia itself with a horrifying police department. It's mind-boggling that like we're still having this conversation and nothing has happened from a legislative aspect anywhere in this country, whether it's defund the police or holding, stronger reforms if you want to go the neoliberal route, whatever it is. Basically, nothing has happened. I mean, Arun, what is it going to take for the spectrum? I mean, you are in the political movement industry. What does it take to have real accountability, real reform, if people want to go the reform route? What is it going to take after all of this? I mean, seriously, I'm asking, like, how do we? But I mean, as a movement,
I don't think it's
like
in the messaging.
Yeah,
I don't think it's in the messaging. I don't think it's in even in the movement part of it. I think I think if you take something as simple as say something like background checks on guns, talk about something that that people who own guns, the people who Rep. Rabb's talking about, his family, and also the people who surrounded his office can all basically agree on, is that we have something like that most Americans don't want. Certain trade associations, certain people who are rich don't want this. And the way our system works when we have don't have the courage to confront things like the filibuster is that with a small bought minority, you can prevent progress from happening. You can prevent the richest country in the world from enacting things that every other industrialized nation does. You just need a certain percentage, and it's enough that you can buy. So we need serious electoral reform, and we also need our people who actually manage to get in power. The theme of this program, which used to be called Wielding Power with the three of us, people need to take that power and wield it effectively, because if you don't, we are a state that is captured by a minority.
Right.
Just like, we would talk about countries in the Balkans and stuff, but this is us.
But when you have, every city in this country is there's a Democratic lawmaker, many of whom are supposedly progressive, and de Blasio in itself, with exception to 3 or 4 things, he's actually fundamentally been way more progressive than any other mayor in the last 40 years, probably including Dinkins, given this state. But he is beholden. His own daughter was doxxed by the NYPD. What is it going to take, Rep. Rabb? Like, there has to be something.
Okay, so I have a couple of answers. The first one is in the form of a question. When are we going to ban fax machines? And the answer is we don't have to, because it's a trash technology and it's been replaced by much better technology to communicate. I defied Harrisburg, the state cap, when I had my business cards. I said, remove the fax. I don't want anyone to fax me anything ever. Okay. It had its place for a very short period of time. And in the history of, in human history, that's how I want modern policing to be, like the fax machines. Like, Listen, they tried this shit for 320 years. It's crazy. It didn't work. Then because they didn't realize that the real power is in community safety. When communities take control and have the resources, they have social services, and they have all the things that build community wealth and connectedness and all the things that keep us truly safe, right? So what's going to happen is twofold. One is we have to destroy the police industrial complex, which is the Fraternal Order of Police. They were given special powers in Pennsylvania in 1968. Does that year remind you of anything? But it's not a coincidence.
A few little things.
Yeah, so they have weaponized this fake union to protect the worst of the worst. So that can be done legislatively. And with 102 votes in our House and 26 in the Senate, eventually we will strip that down. We were more likely to do that under Democratic control when there's the hue and cry from the masses like the summer of 2020. So I'm very confident that we could do that. That's on the electoral side. But in terms of what we need to do to protect ourselves and not depend on law enforcement that has been infected by this legacy of white supremacy and patriarchy and misogyny, don't sell soap to people who don't wash. We can't expect someone who wears a t-shirt like that, who promotes stuff like on social media, to be in charge of all of our safety, because he's more concerned about this poor white man who had a bad day and drove past, I don't know, countless strip joints to go specifically to a place where there are Asian American women. Okay, and the fact that he doesn't know that and can't connect the dots means that he's part of the problem. So we have programs like the STARS program in Denver. My colleague Leslie Herod and others put that forth in Denver. We're seeing how effective that'll be in terms of reallocating resources to where they need to go so that the police are not overburdened with responsibilities they're not really set up to do. Right. We have the COOTS program in this, Washington State, I believe. Where's it? Oregon. I think it's Oregon. That does something similar for years. So if we invest in what actually works, instead of having knee-jerk reactions saying we need more cops on the street or we need so-called community policing, whatever that means, then we can actually see what works. And when people see that it works, they're going to say, okay, I'm not afraid of that anymore. Let's invest in that. And here's the quiet thing. There are a lot of cops who never signed up to
be social workers,
to be deputized by ICE, to tackle large teenagers with intellectual disabilities. Like nobody wants to be in that position. They're not saying this is what I became a cop for. Now, many folks wanted to be a cop for very nefarious reasons, but there are folks who want to be a cop because maybe that's part of their family culture. They have a very different perspective on what they can do, but no one thinks I want to do a lot of paperwork and I want to put myself in this line of fire in ways that are not really about what policing was ever supposed to be about.
Arun?
But I feel like we're talking about this, like we're getting close to the way that you're premising this question, Nomi, is like we're getting close to some sort of tipping point and we're approaching there and you're wondering how high we get. And when you show me this clip, that's like not what I think. I think what rocket fuel the talented Mr. Trump was, for white supremacy in general, and how much farther we are, and how people who would have said this stuff quiet 20 years ago are saying it out loud now, and how the way he mispronounces China, have such like a huge footprint. And so to me, it just sort of shows how deep and how wide the rot is. And when we're looking around for all those cops who got in it for the right reasons, it's like, I think we will find less of them than we think, just statistically based on the fact that now we have a better look under the floorboards, and I don't think we like what we see.
And they're being radicalized too. It's not just that suddenly folks are coming out of the
woodwork.
woodwork.
Farther apart. I mean, things are moving the wrong direction, I would say. Like the curve is going the wrong way.
Right, and you can't talk about good cops who remain complicit in an infected system, right? And I tell anyone in law enforcement, the standard I have for you is the standard I have for me as an elected official. There's a high level of transparency and accountability. You can access every email. You can see exactly where I am, all my votes, everything I legislate, how much money I make, where I put money. All that stuff is readily available to the entire world. So we have to, when we talk about modern policing, we have to use a better analogy than good apples. It's bad. We have to talk about a toxic barrel.
Yes.
Policing is a toxic barrel.
Yeah.
And we need to build,
Barrel
we
of
need to buy
sludge.
a whole new barrel that is radically different than how we process policing and safety today, because it's a myth.
So Dorsey, can you put up that there's a clip related to this? I just want to show new footage out from the Capitol. While we're putting that up, there was a question from Liu Kang saying, how do we go about getting municipalities to discontinue their police union contracts or for their civil suits to be paid from their pensions? So this is ultimately the tipping point that I'm talking about. If you can't get effing Mayor de Blasio, whose daughter was doxxed,
He's gone the other
by,
direction.
yeah, if you can't get him, then what is like, what are they what do they have on him? I mean, I can't think of anything else other than like, what do they have on him? They've already doxed his daughter. What is?
So I can't speak for him, and but I can tell you that in Philadelphia, which is the most incarcerating major city in the world, that there is movement afoot. Oh goodness. What are we looking at?
This is just this is part of the Capitol insurrection. It's just being replayed on.
What is that?
The FBA. It seems to be.
That's a fire extinguisher. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, he's wow.
Just hosing down law enforcement.
He's hosing down law enforcement. Probably because he is law enforcement, or
Right.
who
It's a big
knows? I
joke.
mean, either they're cosplaying or. Yeah. Anyways,
And that's him, huh? Or allegedly.
yeah. No, but this is from the FBI, and they're saying if you know this person, to call. So yeah, if you know this person, call.
And look, the people who've been reporting folks have been quote unquote friends, relatives of these people. And here's the thing. They're pretty much all white.
Right.
And overwhelmingly male. And the people who are reporting them are folks who are probably not that surprised. We heard about that with someone recently. I was like, oh yeah, this person was doing this and we're not surprised. This is how he's operated on college campus, no surprise.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I always say, I've mentioned this before on the show, that silence is complicity in a very real sense, because Black people can't come into those households, can't come into those neighborhoods and those conversations. It changes radically just with us showing up. There need to be white people talking to white people and say, this has to stop, because that's the only people they're going to listen to, right?
So I want to give an anecdote right now. I don't care because I'm putting it on blast, so I have to practice what I preach. I had lunch with a friend of mine yesterday who is of Mexican and Greek descent. She grew up in Mexico, so she's got a little bit of an accent, whatever. This is important to the story. So she was telling me about somebody that we know from the Greek community who has been ultra Trumpian since I've known him since I was born. And he owns many businesses, and his behavior got so outrageous that a group of his friends started to push him out of the circle, stopped doing business with him, started a petition. When I say Trumpian, I mean aggressively, like the Capitol, like if he could have had that opportunity to do this. Major business owner, they started a petition. They had to shut down their website. His business partners pulled out. Everybody was embarrassed. And I know that sounds aggressive, but this is why they think they're being canceled, because their behaviors are actually, some are being held accountable, or they're seeing others being held accountable. And they think that's cancel culture when you're just being held accountable for your white supremacy. So I mean, if you can do what they did to him, and she helped organize it because he said something about immigrants. She goes, I am an immigrant. Like, it was amazing. It was an amazing story. So anyways, I want to switch gears real quick. It's similar. And Arun, feel free to chime in. Rep Chip Roy of Texas. Great guy. During a hearing on discrimination and violence against Asian Americans said this. Let's play this clip.
My concern about this hearing is that it seems to want to venture into the policing of rhetoric in a free society, free speech, and away from the rule of law and taking out bad guys. My concern about this hearing.
Yeah, as I was saying, cancel culture, taking on free speech. They don't want to be held accountable. Arun?
I mean, I think that's right. And what you see here is a legislator who is not particularly worried about what he's saying. This wasn't like a huge performance. This wasn't a huge calculated, crisis managed, pre-planned thing. This is business as usual from, from a racist representative. And that's what scares me, is that we've had the summer we had. We've had some real community building. We've had information. We've plunged into the consciousness of America. And is that tipping point that you keep asking for coming or not?
Right.
Do we have enough momentum? I don't know.
Let's play the rest of the clip real quick. We had a little bit of a glitch.
I would also suggest that the victims of cartels moving illegal aliens deserve justice. The American citizens in South Texas that are getting absolutely decimated by what's happening at our southern border deserve justice. The victims of rioting and looting in the streets last week, businesses closed, burned last summer, deserve justice. We believe in justice. I would.
All the people at the southern border, not the ones in cages, not the babies separated from their parents that will never be able to find them again. Who? I've been in the southern border. Who? The Minutemen? They are so. Oh yeah, those infants. They're really coming for you. Are you effing kidding me, man, Chris? Rabb.
This is an extension of my state legislature. This is my every day. There's nothing you're going to show me. There's nothing you're going to show me that I haven't seen before. Just on Tuesday, we debated a bill that came out of the Judiciary Committee on which I serve that made it illegal to project various fluids onto law enforcement officers, only law enforcement officers. So urine, feces, or saliva.
Don't mean I have questions, but we'll keep them to ourselves.
So it was literally saliva, feces, urine, and there was specific mention of folks with HIV. And so it purposely and knowingly provided misinformation of people who are HIV positive and how these things are contracted. And even if you take out that utterly bigoted language, you're limiting free speech because you are not, because the bill did not say you knowingly did it, but that you did it. So if you inadvertently are too close to a law enforcement officer, or frankly, vice versa, right? Law enforcement officer is in your face and you are shouting, which is your right. And he claims that you did that and doesn't have to prove that you meant to do it. That is obviously going to shut down your First Amendment rights.
And that's also so insidious. It sounds like a smart way to, like, in the next pandemic when there's protests, to be like, normally we like this kind of thing, but it's against the law for a good reason. You're putting law enforcement at risk.
Right.
Interesting.
Right. So this is normalized. And also our districts in Pennsylvania, it's the largest full-time state legislature in the country. We represent around 63,000 people. And for me, that's 2.5 neighborhoods in an urban area, right? Philly. But for in rural areas, it could represent 2 counties 100 times the size of Philadelphia, literally. Right. But the way they cut them up is so that they're ideological islands. So their base is very comfortable with this language. And remember how I say, no matter what your first issue is, whatever you care most about, environmental justice, gender equity, whatever, your second and third things must be electoral reform and media reform.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I think all of us would agree on that. Arun, final thoughts?
I mean, I think that it's sort of hard to take a look around 55, however many days it's in, and see where we're at post-Trump. But the more you look around, the more it isn't that Trump wrecked the store, the more it really is that he just, overturned the stones and let the worst creatures out. And I think it's just going to take a lot more. I'm not sure we're on track to even sort of contain the damage, even then to build on it. And these conversations sometimes leave me wanting more.
Yeah, I mean, and it would be incredible if Biden had a plan. I mean, if he could vocally come out with a plan to take on extremism in this country, I mean, that alone, that conversation alone would be transformative.
It was emotional speech time
Yes,
today and
that's right.
yesterday, and we didn't get one, and I'm a little disappointed. Yeah.
Yeah, we got the vaccine rollout information, which was great, but it was like 20 minutes of logistics. Thanks. Rep Rabb, final thoughts?
We just have to continue having these conversations and look towards systemic solutions to systemic problems. We're not going to symptom chase our way out of this.
Yeah.
We're not going to have all the bad guys step down, right? Because these are structural things that need to be addressed. And if we don't know that they're structural, if we don't talk about the history and the politics behind them and the words that have been used and the policies, then we're just going to be playing whack-a-mole.
Exactly. Well said. All right, guys. Arun, Rep Rabb, always grateful to have you. Arun, it's probably past dinner time. Enjoy your dinner. I don't know how late.
A little earlier this time because of our daylight savings difference. So it's actually only like 9 p.m. now, So
Germans eat early though, right? They're not
the Germans
like the
are early
Greeks.
eaters. They're not like the Italians or the Greeks.
Or the Greeks, yeah. I was thinking about it, I was like, could I go to Greece and film the show from Greece? And then I was like, no, because it would be like 11 o'clock and that would be dinner time in Greece. So, all right, guys, have a good week. See you next week. Yeah. Some shout outs. We have Pete from Oakland. Okay, Nomiki, you win. I'm signing up for your book club today. Yay! Also, just got to show you love on your favorite day of the week. Happy Thursday. Be well. I say it's my favorite day every day, don't I? Don't tell the other days. Thank you to Silver Ball Stud, Jesse James 702, and Nug Wrangler, who all recently subscribed at Tier 1 on Twitch. Thank you, guys. JL, thank you, Nomiki, for bringing awareness to this hate crime. Trump using COVID-19 as a slur against China contributed to the rise of hate crimes against Asian Americans within the last year. Oh, absolutely. I personally know people who've been affected, whose parents, Helen Hong actually was on the show last week. Her father, just a few days ago, was beat up. It's very real. Sam Talarico says, thanks for all you do, Nomiki, to fight corruption and to keep us informed. It is a team effort. Trust me, a lot of people behind this project, but thank you. Appreciate you. JKR Dozer, thanks for the love. Liu Kang, we already asked your question, but just want to give you another shout out. Thank you for the love. And Kyler Asado says, we need inequality media or Gravel Institute style YouTube videos for history lessons that Professor Harvey Kaye drops on us. He actually just did one for Gravel. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but that is the truth. We're gonna do a few more explainers, I think, in the near future, but it's a lot of production and they take a lot of time. So hopefully we'll be able to do some of that. All right, everybody on Twitch and YouTube, thank you for mixing it up, and MIDI Docs and Mario for working those algorithms, and our YouTube mods, Bob C, Choke and the Orb, and Chuck Diesel, always grateful to you. And over at Twitch, Nightbot, Dorian Sapiens, A Difficult Truth, Our Means, and Nug Wrangler, thanks for keeping the chat room troll free. We got a few more here. Oh, Prairie Fire Kowalski from Nebraska. Anarcho-Bidenism is not better than FDR LBJ. True dat. All right, guys, we will see you tomorrow for Femme Friday. Be well, stay in solidarity.